Hello, Mingalaba, everyone. Very happy to talk to you today. And first of all, I want to thank MMNOG, organizing committee, for inviting me and providing me this opportunity to do this session for you. So this session is going to be on multilingual internet and especially focusing on deploying domain names and email addresses in local languages. So that is the objective of this session. We will have some discussions along with these concepts. To introduce myself, my name is Champika, and I work as the Technical Engagement Director for the Asia Pacific region, and I work for ICANN. I think you may have heard about ICANN in the past. ICANN has been a supporter of MMNOG, MMIX from the beginning of these events. So we are very happy to work with the community in Myanmar. So this is my current role, and I focus more on technical engagement, capacity building, and so on. Now, as I said earlier, the objective is to discuss about internationalized domain names and email addresses. As you know, we use mostly the ASCII domain names, right? DNS has been there for a very long time. The original DNS drafts, the protocols, the specifications were drafted close to about 45 years ago, right? This was during early 1980s. So since then, DNS has evolved quite a lot. So one of the important aspects of the evolution is that it is now able to support the multilingual internet, or in other words, domain names in different type of scripts. Usually we have been, having domain names, as you know, in English characters, like A, B, C, D, and so on. So these are basically Latin-based characters, even though, of course, English is a Latin-based script. And but they are all, the encoding, what we use is actually the ASCII encoding. So if we are to move further beyond English characters and then try to have domain names in other scripts, say, for example, in Myanmar scripts, right? Then we have to actually have some different type of encoding, and then the DNS has to actually understand what the scripts are, and then sort of resolve these characters to make sure that it can do the DNS resolution. So this is what we are kind of discuss today. And then again, as you know, even when you take an email address, email ID, there are two parts. One is your mailbox, that's before the @ symbol. And then we have a domain that is after the @ symbol, right? So always, even for email to work, we have to make sure that DNS is working, right? Because the mail servers need to be published in DNS zones, right? So even for email to work, we have to make sure that DNS resolution happens correctly. Now, given that most of you, I believe that you are from network operators or internet service providers, mobile service operators, and so on. So you may be offering some services like domain name DNS related services, or you could be providing mail servers, right, for your clients and so on. So if you are offering this kind of service, then it is important for you to consider these aspects and make sure that your infrastructure can support these multilingual internet, or in other words, email addresses and domain names in different other scripts. So this is why it is important for the network operators or network service providers, DNS operators, and so on, for you to actually have some good understanding about these discussions that we are doing now, right? Okay, now let us go further and then have some discussions. So as I said earlier, the DNS has evolved over the period of time. Very early days when we had the ASCII domains, there were some restrictions. Now there are some rules when it comes to the DNS. What kind of rules, especially when you try to have some domain name labels, there are some certain rules. Now you can see that in here, if you see the slide, there are some rules saying that you can have only letters, right, digits and hyphen. So if you take a domain name, now there are different labels in a domain name. We have a top level domain label, right? Then we have a second level domain label and third level domain label and so on. So if you take, say, mmnog.mm, say for example, right? If you take a domain name like mmnog.mm, .mm would be your top level domain, whereas mmnog.mm would be, mmnog would be your second level, right? And if you have, say, conference.mmnog.mm, then the conference would be your third level, right? So that's how the DNS is structured, because DNS is a very hierarchical system, where top of this hierarchy, we have the root, and then we have top level domains, then we have second level domains, third level domains, and so on, right? So here we are talking about if we are to have, say, these top level domains or second level domains and so on, there are certain rules or guidelines that you have to apply. So if you are designing some systems and things like that, these things need to be taken into consideration. So if you are talking about top level domains, for top level domains, we can only have letters, right? For top level domains, we can only have letters. So that means in English, we have A to Z, simple letters, and then capital letters. So that's all we can have for top level domains. We can't have numbers or digits for top level domains. And then for second level domains, we can have letters A to Z, and then we can also have digits, that is 0 to 9. And then we can also have this character hyphen, the dash. But we cannot have other characters for domain names. So as you know, in your keyboard, you may be having, various other keys, characters, right? Symbols. You have things like, say, star or plus symbol or equal symbol, exclamation mark, and so on, right? But you can't have all those in domain names, because for domain names, we can only have very specific characters, right? That's how it is organized. Now, so that's in ASCII. So we have to actually consider these similar rules even with internationalized domain names. Now, when the internationalized domain names were kind of introduced, there was an internet standard that came from IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, who developed the internet standard. So initially in 2003, there was a standard came called IDNA 2003 standard. IDNA stands for Internationalized Domain Names for Application, Internationalized Domain Name in Applications, right? So that is the standard. So the earliest standard was IDNA 2003, but later there was a new standard came in 2008, and that is called IDNA 2008, right? So after that, after, when the IDNA 2008 standard came, from 2009 onwards, we have been delegating top-level domains in local language scripts or in local language characters. So since then, you can see there are domain names in various local language scripts, right? That's how it has evolved from traditional ASCII-based internet domain names to more multilingual IDN domain names, internationalized domain names, right? In the same way, IETF also came up with the internet drafts for internationalized email addresses as well. Now, this is called EAI. Now, EAI stands for Email Address Internationalization, which means to have email addresses in local language scripts, different other scripts. So this is how the domain name system has evolved over the years. Now, these are some examples for you to have some understanding about the difference between ASCII and also another encoding scheme called Unicode. Now, if you see the left-hand side graph, that is the ASCII table. Now, ASCII is an encoding scheme, right? ASCII is an encoding scheme. So, therefore, we can represent a certain number of characters using ASCII. Now, these are the characters that can be represented in ASCII, right? So in all this table, we can have altogether 128 characters because we have 7 bits to represent this character. And then 7 bits means 2 raised to the power 7. That gives you 128 number of combinations. So which means we can define 128 characters. So that's how you can see all these different characters, things like what you see in your keyboard, ASCII keyboard, where all those characters are represented. But we cannot use all those characters to define domain names, right? We can only have a selected number of characters to define domain names, because I told you that there are some rules. For example, the top-level domains can only have letters. If you see these characters that are outlined in green color, they are the letters that we can use for domain name, top-level domains, right? So the top-level domains can only have these letters. Whereas for second-level domains, in addition to these letters, we can also have the digits, which is outlined in blue here, that is 0 to 9. And then also I told you that for second-level domains, we can also have, in addition, a symbol called hyphen, which is here outlined in red, right? So in terms of top-level domains, we can only have letters, but for second-level domains, we can have letters, digits, and hyphen. So all the other characters in ASCII table, we do not use for domain names, to define domain names, right? Now you will see what is the constraint in this. The constraint in this is, if, say, for example, if you want to have a domain name in Myanmar character, right? So if you want to have a domain name in Myanmar character, there is no space in the ASCII table to define this Myanmar character, because the ASCII table is all full, right? So that is why we have to go for another encoding scheme, right? So as you know, there are so many languages, so many scripts in the world. We have, say, Chinese scripts, we have Japanese, Korean, Russian, and so many different type of scripts, right? Even in India itself, there are so many scripts are being used. So if we want to define all these scripts, right, in domain names and email addresses and so on, we have to have, or in other words, in general, the applications, we have to use a different encoding scheme. So for this, we use an encoding scheme called Unicode. So Unicode is that is the standard encoding scheme we use for multilingual internet, right? And so that we can use different type of scripts. Now, these are some examples, what you see in your right side. These are some examples of different type of Unicode tables. Because in the Unicode, currently there are about 150,000 characters are being supported or represented in the Unicode. And then out of that, if you consider the number of scripts, there are so many scripts, maybe around 150 scripts are being represented over there, so that we can have lots of characters represented through Unicode. But again, as the same way I said before, we are not going to represent all these characters in the Unicode to domain names, right, or email addresses. We have to be selective, right? Say, for example, in your Myanmar script, you may be having lots and lots of characters in Myanmar script, but we cannot use all those characters in Myanmar script to define domain names in Myanmar, right? So for that, you have to generate some rules. Now, this work has been done before. In fact, the organization that I work for, I told you before, the ICANN stands for Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. So ICANN has got some responsibility, especially to coordinate the domain name system, the DNS, right? Or the unique identifiers, because DNS is a unique identifier. And in this process, or in this work, the coordination work, we have been working very closely with various bodies, various stakeholders, right, to come up with these rules for different language rules, basically, right? So similarly, we have worked with communities in Myanmar, and then to define what sort of characters should be there in domain names in Myanmar, right? So that's some background for you to understand, how this evolution has happened, okay? Now, when you think of this work that has happened, especially to represent the local language scripts in domain names and email addresses, you also have to understand that there are some security constraints, some security issues, right? What kind of security things that here we have to talk about? Say, for example, if you see here, so these are two different labels. Now, one label is in Latin or English, right? Because English is a Latin-based Latin script. Whereas the other label is in Cyrillic. Cyrillic is another script. So some of the countries like in Russia and so on, they use this script called Cyrillic, right? So that's a different script. So one is in English or in Latin, whereas the other one is in Cyrillic. But if you see the symbols, they look same, right? The characters, we call it as a glyph, right? The actual glyph, the character looks similar, right? So this E and E, they look similar. P, this one is look similar. I, C, they all look similar, right? But even though they look similar for a user, in actual fact, they have a different code point. So what do you mean by a code point? Code point is, how the computer or the device understand these characters, right? This is remember that's why we have to have some encoding scheme. So depending on ASCII or Unicode and so on, it has to be encoded. So everything is understood by the device or the computer in machine language. By basically ultimately it'll be in binary, right? So if you consider the code point behind these two labels, you can see that so E can be represented by 0065. This is in hexadecimals, whereas P can be represented using 0070. Ultimately, this will convert into a binary stream, okay? And then I is represented by 0069, and C is represented by 0063. So this is actually the code points for APNIC label in English. But if you see the Cyrillic code point would be is totally different, right? It's not 0065 and so on. So it is 0435, that's a different bit stream. So even though it's totally a different label, for the user, it looks same, right? It looks a very similar sort of symbol for a user. So, but in actual fact, for the processing, it is different, right? So this is why we need to be careful of some of the security issues, because if someone take this label and say create a domain or create a website, then the users can get confused, right? So this is only one example that is shown in English and Cyrillic. And similarly, if you take, say, Chinese, right? So these two examples, because even in China, there are different Chinese scripts that are being used. There is traditional Chinese. There is also simplified Chinese, right? So depending on these little differences, sometimes the symbols, the notations can be different, even though it means the same thing, right? So in this case, it's an example here. So these two labels mean the same thing, but in actual fact, the code point is different, right? So a user can get easily confused with this. If we allocate, say if this to one user, and if we give this domain to another user, then there is always a confusion, right? And similarly, there are other scripts that this happens, right? If you consider the Arabic, this is a domain in Arabic script. Also, you have to understand that Arabic script is written from right to left. Usually we write from left to right, whereas there are other scripts that is being written from right to left as well, like Arabic, for example. So this, again, just like before, these examples earlier, there are some confusions. So what is the solution for this issue? The thing is that we should not, we have to define these similar type of labels as variant labels. So what do you mean by a variant label? Variant label is actually, where you have similar labels that can be created using the same characters or the same character set. And then those variant labels either has to be given to the same registrant or the same person or same organization who applied for that label, or it has to be reserved. If we start giving these domains to multiple people, say if we give this label to one party and this label to another party, then it will create confusion, right? So either these both labels should be given to the same party, or we have to make sure that they are being reserved, right? So these kind of rules has to be created to make sure that there are no security issues as well, right? Okay, so now I hope now there is some understanding on this. So this is what we call root zone label generation, right? So because if I told you about ICANN before, so ICANN is the body that basically, manage the root zone, right? The root database. So from root zone, we delegate top-level domains like .com, .net, .edu, .mm, and so on, right? So all those delegations has to be represented in the root zone, right, as delegations. And then now we can also have internationalized domain names, right? The IDN labels as well. So we can have some labels in different other languages, and then those can be represented in the root zone. So but as I said earlier, to do that, we have to work with those local communities and then understand, all those different labels and create the correct rules and so on. And then only we can represent those in the root zone. So as you can see now, all those different type of scripts, including here Myanmar, the rule sets have been created so that we can represent those different characters in the root zone. So this has been a lot of work over the last several years. And then ICANN has been coordinating this with different communities, different, the language groups and different communities and so on. And then we have created all those rules. So these are some statistics just for you to get some understanding about this. This work has been going on for several years. And then lots of volunteer work has been put into this process because many of these panel members who were from different communities, like say, for example, in Myanmar also, we had a panel to come up with the rules for Myanmar scripts. So they have put a lot of effort in terms of developing the correct rules for Myanmar script, right? So it's all community work that has put into this process, right? So currently, about close to about 400 or so languages are being supported in this work, and then there are 26 unique scripts covered in these proposals, and so on, right? So there has been the understanding is that this work is not simple work. There has to be lots of efforts have been put into this process. Now, going further into the IDNs, now IDN stands for Internationalized Domain Names, right? And then EAI, or Email Address Internationalization. Now, so you can see that the difference here between an ASCII domain, usually the traditional domain that we use, like example -123.com, and then this is an IDN, internationalized domain name. So these scripts are in Thai language, Thai characters, right? So the orange color, this part is your top level domain, right? I told you this top level domain, we can only have letters. So in ASCII, you can only have English letters from A to Z for the top level domains. And similarly, remember those panel work that I was talking about? So they have to define what letters we can represent in root zone or the top level domain in Thai characters, right? So based on that definitions, based on that rules, these are some examples of characters that or the letters that we can represent Thai characters in the top level domain. So these are only one example, but then there are many other characters we can represent in the top level domains, but they have to be letters. They cannot be numbers or digits or hyphens or any other characters, right? And similarly for second level domains, I told you there is a rule, that is the LDH rule. LDH stands for letters, digit, and hyphen. So we can have letters like this, and then we can have digits like this, 1, 2, 3, and so on. And then we can have hyphen, right? But we can't have any other characters in ASCII domains. So similar rules should also apply in IDNs as well. But for those rules, we have to refer to this internet standard called IDNA 2008. I think I mentioned you earlier about this standard. It stands for Internationalized Domain Names in Applications the 2008 standard. So this is the current standard that we use for these applications. So if you are an application developer and so on, that develops, say, for example, even if you're developing a registration form, right, web form, these standards need to be referred, and you have to make sure that you're in a, say, if you are accepting registration. So if someone try to give a email ID in Myanmar script or email ID in Chinese script, so the form should accept in the correct way, right? Because many of the forms that are available, sometimes, they may only accept English characters or ASCII characters. The moment you give in different other characters, it might give an error saying that invalid email ID or invalid domain or something like that, right? So these things for any developers and so on, you should refer to this IDNA 2008 standard, right? Okay, now there is also one more thing I want to highlight here, which is what we call the Punicode. So what is this Punicode? So this is the, when we use the encoding system, this is the encoding system that used in the DNS to represent the non-ASCII characters, like, the Unicode characters, for example, like, Arabic or Chinese or Myanmar or whatever, right? So these characters need to be represented or converted to ASCII characters, right? ASCII characters. We know that what are the ASCII characters, right? So this conversion, right, or this encoding scheme to convert this is what we call the Punicode, right? So Punicode is simply a conversion where we convert from Unicode to a ASCII code, right? So the user, right, if you see from user's perspective, user can give the input or the domain name in your local language script. Say for example, if you want to type a domain name in Myanmar script, right? If you want to type a domain name in Myanmar script, you can type that domain name in the URL bar, right? In the URL bar, you can type a domain name in Myanmar script, right? So there's no problem. You can use your Myanmar keyboard or whatever, and then type that in Myanmar script. Okay, so the user will see and type the domain name in your local language script. But then the DNS has to resolve this, right? Because, DNS resolution has to work. So before the DNS resolution, this input that you gave in Myanmar characters or Myanmar scripts, this need to be converted to a Punicode internally. So this is a internal process. User would not see this. Internally, the application has to convert this script or the local language script into a Punicode. So Punicode will give an output similar to a text or the ASCII, right? ASCII text. And then once it is converted to this Punicode, then the DNS can resolve this, right? So the DNS resolution, because the DNS resolution works based on ASCII, right? So that's how to resolve that, you have to provide the Punicode for the DNS to do that resolution. Now, to differentiate the usual ASCII and Punicode, there is a certain label. So that label is XN-. That's again an ASCII label, ASCII string. So any ASCII string that starts with XN-, is actually the Punicode encode of that particular label. So let me tell again. So if any ASCII code, right, that starts with XN-, in total, it is called the Punicode, right? So because we have to add the XN-, in the front, to that ASCII code, right? So once that XN-, is added, we know that that is the correct Punicode for this particular Unicode label, right? So So this is the Punicode. So we will use this term quite often when it comes to the IDNs and IDNs and email address internationalization. Only thing is that you don't have to really worry about this Punicode as such, because applications will do this. Because there are Punicode converters. You can just, if you are a developer and so on, you can just use a Punicode converter to do this. There are lots of these Punicode converters available, and then you can use one of those libraries, right? And so when it comes to the IDNs, there are two equivalent forms, right? Two equivalent forms. What are those two equivalent forms? One is called a U label. U label is actually a Unicode label. So that is the label in Unicode characters, like in Myanmar characters, say, for example, right? And then the other label, other form is called A label. A label is the ASCII label, right? So we have Unicode label. So this is an example. So similarly, I told you this is in Thai characters, right? So this is in Thai characters. So that's what we call a Unicode label, because those characters are in the Unicode. And then this one is an A label, right? ASCII label. You can see this starts from X and hyphen hyphen. So that means it's a Punicode, right? So this is the Punicode conversion of this Thai character, this top level domain, this one, right? So when you convert this into Punicode, you will see X and hyphen hyphen O3C W4H, right? Now the DNS can resolve this, because this is the whole label, whole character set is in ASCII. So the DNS should be able to resolve this, right? Now, there are some little bits of nitty-gritty details in this process. There is something called normalization, because sometimes when you say, even in Myanmar characters, when you input a certain character, you can have different sequences to define this character, right? Say, for example, you can have two different key sequences. Something like this. Say if you see this E with the accent, right? You can, there are some scripts that you have these type of extensions or these kind of accents, what we call, right? So you have on top of E there is an accent. Now there is, if you consider the whole glyph with the accent, the code point would be 00E8 in hexadecimals, right? 00E8. And then, but you can also have this based on two separate code points, so which means two separate keys or two separate input types. So you can have E, and then you can have a separate accent input, right? So if you're giving two inputs like this, then there are two code points, 0065 and 0300. So now you can see that there are multiple ways we can input the application, right? So if that is the case, we still have, application has to make sure we do something called normalization, right? Normalization means you standardize into one input, right? Rather than having two, we just standardize into one input. So this is what we call normalization. So these are all defined in that IDNA 2008 standard that I mentioned you, the libraries, right? So if you are a developer and so on, you should be considering this. You should follow this IDNA 2008 protocol. Don't follow this IDNA 2003 because that's deprecated, that's old. So we don't follow that. Okay. I think I have already explained you about this A label, the Punicode, and so on. So that's how we define U label and A label. So let's see some examples of some internationalized domain names, right? So this is, say, this domain name is in Armenian language, say, for example, right? So you can see this is the top. This is the top level domain, right? And then we have the second level domain. You can see there's a dot here, right? There's a dot. So this is the top level domain. This is the second level domain. And similarly, this is a language or a script used in India called Oriya, right? So this is the top level domain. You can see a dot. It's just like, something.com, okay? Or mmnog.mm, right? So mm is the top level domain. So this is a top level domain, and then this is a dot, and then this is the second level domain, right? So similarly, this is in different other language script, Georgian, Korean. So like this, these are all examples to show you, to get some idea of, how an international domain name looks like. Similarly, let's go into, talk about internationalized email addresses. We call it as EAI, email address internationalization. Email address internationalization. So this is, now there is a term here we are using called UTF-8. UTF stands for Unicode Transformation Format, right? Unicode Transformation Format, 8 bits. Because I told you earlier, because ASCII, we can't represent all the different characters like Myanmar characters and so on in ASCII because there's no space in ASCII. So that is why we have to go based on Unicode-based encoding schemes. Now, there are different types of Unicode-based encoding schemes. There is something called UTF-8, for example, where you can represent the characters in a variable number of bits. And then there is something called UTF-16 or UTF-32 and so on. So to represent a character in UTF-32, you need 32 bits, which means 4 bytes. So even if you have to save a single character in UTF-32, you have to have 4 bytes of size. So sometimes if you're going to store that character or if you're going to transmit that character, it's going to take a lot of resources, right? Storage and bandwidth and so on, right? So that is why sometimes selecting the proper encoding scheme has to be very important because it has to be more efficient. So this is why it is selected as UTF-8. The encoding scheme, the one that it is selected is the UTF-8, right? Because UTF-8 it is giving different advantages for us. One advantage is that I told you it is more variable. So which means depending on the character, we can have variable sizes of bits, right? It can be either represented in 8-bit. If we only need 8 bits, we can represent in 8 bits. If we need 16 bits, we can represent it in 16, 2 bytes, 3 bytes, and so on, right? So we are not wasting too much of space. And the other thing is UTF-8 is ASCII compatible, which means backward compatible. So we can even we can still use with UTF-8, we can still use ASCII characters. So because, after introducing UTF-8, we don't want to really throw away all that work that was done with ASCII, right? Because ASCII work has been done for so many years, so we don't want to just throw it away, right? So we still want to have that backward compatibility. So that is why the UTF-8 is being used. Now, so defining the EAI or IDNs, we have to consider this UTF-8 encoding scheme. So in an email ID, we have 2 parts in an email ID. One is before the @ symbol, that is what we call mailbox, right? Say if my email ID is champika@example.com, the mailbox would be Champika and the domain name would be example.com. And similarly, if you have an email ID called yourname@mmnog.mm, your mailbox would be your name and the domain would be mmnog.mm, right? So you have 2 different parts. One is the mailbox, one is the domain name. So if we can represent the mailbox and the domain name in UTF-8, then we call it as EAI or internationalized email, right? So that's the definition of EAI or email address internationalization. We are not here referring to, say, having local language characters in your email subject line or email body, right? So if you say, for example, if I get an email from you in Myanmar character, you have that in the email subject line, or you have the Myanmar character in the email body, right? But if you still put my email ID in ASCII characters, right, then obviously that is not an EAI, right? Because we don't consider the subject line or the body, right? We are talking about the email address itself, okay? If you don't have the local language characters in your email ID, then that is not an EAI, right? So I hope now you understand the difference between EAI, what is EAI and what is not EAI, right? Okay, so based on this, we can now define email addresses as well. So this is a ASCII email ID, name@example.com, just like what I said before. And this one is an, UTF-8 based email or EAI email ID, right? So which is defined in your local language scripts. So this one is defined in Thai scripts. So you can see that this is the mailbox, then you have the @ symbol, and then you have the domain, right? But you can also, of course, there are different ways that you can represent this. Domain name can be an IDN, right? Domain name can be an IDN, but the U label, the mailbox can be in A label. The mailbox can be also in A label or in ASCII. That is, you can do that in different ways, right? So this one, if you consider this example, this one, the whole thing is in U label, right? So if you consider this example, this whole email ID, this one, everything is in U label. So that means your mailbox and the domain, everything is in Thai character. But if you consider this example, the mailbox is in Thai character, but the domain is in actually the Punicode. Remember the Punicode that we are talking about? Because Punicode is the conversion of this U label into this A label, right? So you can do that as well. But the thing is that this is not very user friendly, right? Because user wouldn't be able to actually recognize this because user can't read it and so on, right? But in terms of the resolution is okay because DNS understand these characters, right? Okay, so these are some examples of email IDs in different other language scripts. Now, to adapt this process, quickly I will go through this. Now, as you know, generally, if you want to get a domain name and if you want to deploy domain names and email addresses, you go through various steps, right? In general. Say first of all, if you want to get your own domain name, what do? You normally go and select a domain name, right? You go to a registrar, a reseller, you select a domain name, and you would input it. You will even see whether it is available, right? And then sometimes the registrar application will give you some suggestions, right? If that domain name is taken, it will give you some different suggestions, right? And then you will buy a domain name, right? You will put that into a shopping cart, for example, right? If you're buying it online, and then you have to then, they will give you a registration management system, the portal access. So you will log into the portal, and then you will input your registration data and things like that. And then next step would be to deploy a domain name. So you will have your DNS records. So this is where you will have zone files, you will have NS records, you will have A records and all that. And then you will get a certificate, SSL certificate, TLS certificate for your domain. And then you create a website, right? And then you deploy email addresses. You configure email servers, you configure email clients, and then other considerations related to email. So all these things you do, right? But now when you go from ASCII to IDNs and EAI, you have to make sure all those different applications, different systems, different processes that you have been doing, or everything, they all have to support these new protocols, right? New standards. These applications has to support IDNA 2008, right? These, you should be able to give, you should be able to get domain names in local language scripts. You should be able to create email IDs and so on. So if you are using, say, a browser, right? If you want to search a domain name, you should be able to give that domain name in your browser. You should be able to display that. So all those applications and all those processes that you go through, they should be supported to have IDNs and EAI, right? So this is the simple message that we want to give. So if you're offering any of these services, right, you can be a network operator, you can be a email service provider, you could be providing mail servers, you could be providing ISP services, resolution, and all that. So make sure that you can support internationalized domain names and email address internationalization. So this is what we call actually universal acceptance, or simply it is called UA. UA stands for universal acceptance. So you have to be UA ready or UA compliant. So if you are an organization, if you are, you don't have to be ISP, you don't have to be, whether you are any organization, you could be a bank, you could be a university, right? Still, you could be using systems. If you're using systems that are not compatible with UA, universal acceptance, then you will have problems, because people are now getting email IDs in different languages. People are getting domain names in different languages. So you have to make sure if you are having any systems, you should be able to support these, right? So that's the key thing. So make sure if you are deploying a domain name, you can have, if you are creating these A records, MX, and all these DNS records, it has to be created in A labels. If you remember the difference between A label and U label is the Unicode label, whereas A label is the ASCII label. I told you earlier that DNS would not understand the U labels, right? The Myanmar DNS would not understand Myanmar characters. So you have to first convert that into a Punicode or an ASCII string. So that is why you have to define all your DNS records in ASCII, right? So that's important. And then similarly, the certificates. If you're buying a certificate, that certificate, you have to generate those certificates in A labels as well, right? If you are configuring websites, web servers, they should support IDN configurations, for headers and so on, okay? And then they should support UTF-8. UTF-8 is the key. I told you that before. And then all these other applications, you have to make sure, say if you're using a CMS, right? Any customer management systems and things like that, they all have to support all those internationalized domain names and email addresses and make sure that IDNA 2008 standard is being followed, okay? Now, how a domain name gets resolved? Say, for example, I'm typing this is my local language, right? My script, my own script. So if I want to type a domain name in my own script, I will type that in my, say in the browser, right? So I will type that in the browser. And then what will the browser do? First, it'll do that normalization. I told you that, if I give that in multiple inputs, it has to be standardized into a single input. And then browser has to convert this script into an Punicode or ASCII-based compatible Punicode, right? So that starts with X and hyphen. So this will be converted to this. So that, if you see the red is the top level domain. If you see the blue, that is the second level domain. So this will be converted to an ASCII string now. Now that's done by the browser or the application. After that, the DNS resolution will happen. So the DNS will, now this is ASCII string, it will ask for the IP address of this. That's what we need in the DNS resolution, right? So that's the domain name, the website. So it will ask for the IP address from the resolver that it needs the IP address. So once the IP address is received, then the client can connect to the server based on that IP address and download the web page. So that's simply, how the internationalized domain names will get resolved. In terms of emails, now this is as you know, we have mail clients, right? And then the mail servers. So because in email terminology, we have mail transfer agents and mail user agents. So this is the mail user agent that uses the client software, whereas this is the mail transfer agent where they have the mail server software, right? So between, when this sender send an email, it goes from client to the mail server, and then from one mail server to another mail server, to another mail server, and so on, and then to the receiver. So in this process, between all those mail servers, right? Currently, we have SMTP protocol, right? SMTP is the protocol that we run between the mail servers. But now all these mail servers, they should support SMTP UTF-8. Remember the UTF-8? So that means the mail servers should be able to support the internationalized domain names and internationalized email addresses. So once that support is enabled, then, of course, when the sender try to send it, a sender will wait for the confirmation from the receiving mail server, whether it can support SMTP UTF-8. If the receiving server say, okay, it can support SMTP UTF-8, then only the sender will send it. Sending server will send it. Otherwise, the email will be dropped. So you have to make sure that if you are a network operator, if you are ISP and so on, you have to make sure that all your mail servers should be able to support SMTP UTF-8. And similarly, the mail client applications also should support SMTP UTF-8. If you do not support SMTP UTF-8, the mail will not be delivered, right? So this is something for you to understand and remember. We have to make sure all the mail servers in the path, right? All the mail servers in the path, they have to support SMTP UTF-8, okay? So that's very important. So in terms of deploying email addresses, we have to make sure SMTP UTF-8 flag, the server side, they should support that. Client side also, they should support, they should be able to display the emails correctly in different languages. So which means, they should support the UTF-8 U-label format. And then make sure, the mailboxes and so on that can be created where the users can input in local language scripts, local language characters, and so on. In the same way, the email addresses, maybe you have to have some guidelines for the users, how the email IDs, because, in organizations, you have email ID policies, right? Creating email IDs and so on. So you can actually have this into your email ID policies and also have some proper guidelines to make sure that these other email IDs also can be accepted, right? Okay, I think this just to, finally to show you some snapshot. Over the years, these are the number of mail servers in the DNS that can support email address internationalization. So if you see this green line, you can see over the years from, say, this is from 2021 to last year, 2025, lots of mail servers. Now they have started supporting internationalized email addresses. That means we can send emails through those mail servers. Even if you try to send an email to a Chinese email ID or Myanmar email ID and so on, these mail servers can understand that, right? But still, you can see the figure is around 28%. So that means out of the mail servers in the world, only about 28% of the mail servers, say out of about 35 million or so mail servers out there in the world, only about 28% of the mail servers at the moment, they can support email address internationalization, or internationalized scripts. Still about 70% of the email servers, they still can't support it because they don't support SMTP UTF-8. So we can see that every year it increases. So maybe in the next few years, these will be much more. So that is why we are trying to create this awareness, so that if you're running any mail service, if you're ISP, if you're a network operator, and even if you're a corporate who are running your mail servers, make sure your mail servers can support internationalized email, so SMTP UTF-8. Right, so that's what I wanted to convey. And we also have a quiz. I think I've taken about 10 minutes extra because we started I think about 10-15 minutes late. So I hope that you got some understanding, so you got some awareness about this topic. Hope now you can have some more, you can refer to some more references, and you can go to ICANN website for more information and so on. And also, if you have some more questions or more clarifications, you can always contact me, and I'm quite happy to answer your questions or help you and so on, right? So thank you very much for listening, and I will now leave it to the organizers to take this session. Thank you.